The war room aboard the Draknari flagship Blood Talon buzzed with quiet conversation as holographic star maps flickered in the dim light. Admiral Korath studied the tactical display with growing interest, his scaled fingers drumming against the metal table. The intelligence reports spread before him painted a picture of opportunity that seemed almost too good to be true. "Tell me again about these humans," Korath said to his intelligence officer, Commander Voss. The younger Draknari shifted uncomfortably under his superior's gaze. "A recently spacefaring species, Admiral. They've only been beyond their home system for about 2 centuries. Current expansion encompasses roughly 47 star systems, mostly agricultural and mining colonies. Their technology appears to be at least 300 years behind our standard equipment." Korath leaned back in his chair, a predatory smile crossing his reptilian features. The Draknari Empire had built its reputation on swift, decisive conquests of weaker species. These humans sounded like perfect targets for their next expansion wave. "What about their military capabilities?" Voss consulted his datapad. "Minimal space-based defenses. Most of their colonies rely on planetary shields and ground-based weapons. Their fleet consists mainly of cargo vessels with basic defensive armaments. No evidence of advanced warfare technology." The other officers around the table exchanged knowing looks. It was the same pattern they had seen dozens of times before. A young species would venture into space, establish a few colonies, and then find themselves absorbed into the ever-growing Draknari Empire. Most surrendered without significant resistance once they understood the futility of fighting. "Sir," Voss continued, "our long-range scouts suggest we could take their entire territory within 6 months. Their response times are slow, and they appear to lack any unified command structure." Admiral Korath stood and walked to the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the war room. Outside, the stars of the outer rim beckoned, countless worlds waiting to be claimed for the Empire. The human territory sat on the edge of known space, a collection of systems that would serve as an excellent stepping stone for further expansion. However, Voss added carefully, "I recommend a full intelligence gathering operation before we commit to invasion. There are some inconsistencies in the data that concern me." Korath turned from the viewport, his expression hardening. "Inconsistencies? Explain." "Well, sir, their expansion rate doesn't match their apparent technological level. For a species with such primitive capabilities, they've spread remarkably far. Also, several of our long-range probes have simply vanished near their border systems. We assumed they were destroyed by natural phenomena, but the pattern seems unusual." "Phew," Admiral waved dismissively. "Space is dangerous, Commander. Equipment fails. As for their expansion rate, perhaps they're simply more ambitious than cautious. Many young species overextend themselves before reality teaches them their limitations." Other voices around the table murmured agreement. The Draknari had encountered numerous species that had spread themselves thin across multiple systems, only to collapse when faced with a coordinated attack. It was a common mistake among primitive civilizations. "I propose a reconnaissance in force," Korath announced, returning to his seat. "We'll take a battle group into their space and assess their defenses firsthand. If they're as weak as our intelligence suggests, we can begin immediate conquest operations. If they prove more troublesome than expected, we can always withdraw and plan a larger assault." Commander Voss looked uncomfortable. "Admiral, entering their space without permission could be considered an act of war under most galactic conventions. Perhaps we should attempt diplomatic contact first?" The room fell silent. Several officers exchanged glances, and Korath's expression grew dangerously cold. The Draknari Empire had not built its vast territory through diplomatic niceties. "Commander Voss," the Admiral said slowly, "are you suggesting we ask permission to survey what will soon be our own territory? Should we perhaps send them a polite message explaining our intentions to conquer them?" Nervous laughter rippled around the table. Voss's face flushed darker, and he looked down at his datapad. "No, sir. Of course not. I was merely suggesting we follow standard protocols. The only protocol that matters is victory," Korath declared. "We'll take Battle Group 7 into their space. 12 ships should be more than sufficient to handle anything these humans can field against us. We'll probe their defenses, gather detailed intelligence, and demonstrate the futility of resistance. The Admiral activated the holographic display again, zooming in on the human border systems. One world in particular caught his attention, a colony designated in their files as New Geneva. According to intelligence reports, it was one of their newer settlements, lightly defended but strategically positioned near several major shipping routes. "We'll start here," Korath said, pointing to the system. New Geneva appears to be a typical frontier colony. Minimal defenses, small population, probably relying on their homeworld for protection. Once we demonstrate our superiority there, word will spread throughout their territory. Many of their other colonies might surrender without a fight. The planning session continued for several hours. Battle Group 7 would consist of the heavy cruiser Void Render, 6 destroyers, and 5 frigates. More than enough firepower to overwhelm any primitive defenses the humans might have constructed. The force would jump to New Geneva, conduct a thorough survey of the system, and make contact with local authorities to demand surrender. As the meeting concluded, officers began filing out to prepare their ships. Commander Voss lingered behind, still reviewing his intelligence reports. "Something troubling you, Commander?" Korath asked. Voss hesitated before speaking. "Sir, I keep coming back to those missing probes. 12 separate reconnaissance drones, all lost near human space over the past year. The probability of that happening by chance is extremely low." Admiral Korath considered this for a moment, then shrugged. "Perhaps their defenses are better than we thought. All the more reason to go in with sufficient force to handle any surprises. 12 ships against a frontier colony. Even if they have some hidden capabilities, we'll be prepared." 3 days later, Battle Group 7 assembled at the edge of Draknari space. The ships formed up in standard attack formation, their hulls gleaming with fresh battle paint. Admiral Korath felt the familiar thrill of impending conquest as he gave the order to jump. The stars shifted, and 12 Draknari warships materialized in human space, uninvited and unannounced. Within minutes, they detected the energy signatures of New Geneva's orbital facilities and began their approach. None of them noticed the nearly invisible sensor arrays that had been tracking their every movement since the moment they arrived. The morning coffee in Defense Station Bastion's command center had barely finished brewing when the proximity alarms began their urgent wailing. Captain Reed set down his mug and moved to the central tactical display, where red warning indicators were blinking across the New Geneva system map like angry Christmas lights. "Report," Reed commanded, his voice calm despite the chaos of activity erupting around the command center. Lieutenant Torres, the duty officer, looked up from her console with barely controlled excitement. 12 unknown vessels just jumped into the system, sir. Configuration matches no known civilian or diplomatic classes. They're moving in military formation toward New Geneva colony. Reed studied the tactical display as more information streamed across the screens. The unknown ships were large, heavily armed, and approaching with the confidence of a force that expected no real opposition. Their formation was textbook military, scouts in front, heavy hitters in the middle, support vessels covering the flanks. "Any attempt at communication from the intruders?" Reed asked. "None, sir. They jumped in silent and have ignored all our standard hailing frequencies. Colonial Traffic Control has been trying to reach them for the past 8 minutes. The captain nodded, grimly. In human space, there was a simple rule that every spacefarer learned quickly. You announced yourself when entering a system, you identified your purpose, and you requested permission to approach inhabited worlds. Military vessels followed even stricter protocols. These ships had done none of that. "Time to reach New Geneva at current speed?" Reed inquired. "Approximately 4 hours, sir." Reed activated his command console and began entering authorization codes. "Initiate Colonial Defense Protocol 7. Full activation, all assets." Lieutenant Torres paused in her work. "Sir, CDP-7 is a war protocol. Are you certain we want to escalate to that level?" Reed's expression remained unchanged as he continued. Entering commands. 12 unidentified military vessels entering our space without permission, ignoring all communication attempts, and proceeding toward a civilian colony in attack formation. By definition, this is an invasion force. CDP-7. is exactly the appropriate response. The command center transformed as Protocol 7 activated. Additional personnel streamed in from their emergency stations, backup power systems hummed to life, and throughout the New Geneva system, hidden defensive installations began their activation sequences. What the Draknari fleet didn't know was that New Geneva, like every human colony, was protected by a defense network that had been designed by people who understood that space was a hostile environment filled with unknown threats. Humans had learned long ago that hoping for the best while preparing for the worst was the only way to survive in the galaxy. "Sir, we're getting reports from the sensor grid," Torres announced. "The intruders are scanning everything, our colonies, shipping lanes, defensive positions. This is clearly intelligence gathering." Reed watched as his tactical display updated with new information. The system's automated defenses were coming online one by one, their positions hidden among asteroids, debris fields, and camouflage space stations. To any outside observer, New Geneva would appear to be a lightly defended frontier world with minimal military presence. The reality was quite different. Over the past 50 years, human defensive doctrine had evolved around a simple principle: make your enemies think they're fighting someone else until it's too late for them to adapt. Every human colony looked vulnerable from the outside while hiding defensive capabilities that could hold off forces many times their apparent strength. Stealth. Platforms 7 through 24 are now active, sir, reported Sergeant Park from the Defensive Coordinator Station. Jump inhibitors are charging and will be ready in 30 minutes. Long-range sensor arrays are tracking all enemy vessels and have identified their probable command ship. Reed nodded approvingly. The net was beginning to close around the intruders, but they wouldn't know it until they tried to leave. Human defensive strategy relied heavily on allowing enemies to commit fully to their attacks before revealing the true scope of the opposition they faced. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead enemy vessel," Torres announced. "They're attempting to establish communication with New Geneva Colony Administration." "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a reptilian alien in military uniform. The creature's scaled features and predatory expression left no doubt about its intentions. "This is Admiral Korath of the Draknari Empire," the alien announced in heavily accented standard. "You will identify yourself and provide complete information about your defensive capabilities. Resistance is futile. Surrender now, and your people will be treated according to the laws of conquest." Reed almost smiled at the predictable arrogance. It was the same pattern they had seen in intelligence reports from other sectors, alien species that had grown accustomed to easy conquests against technologically inferior civilizations. They expected humans to follow the same script. "Open a channel," Reed ordered. The transmission activated and Reed found himself face to face with the alien admiral. Korath's expression shifted from confident superiority to puzzlement as he took in Reed's human features and military uniform. "I am Captain Reed, commanding officer of New Geneva Defense Command," Reed said formally. "You have entered sovereign, human territory with armed military vessels without authorization. Under Colonial Defense Protocol 7, you are classified as a hostile invasion force. You have 30 minutes to power down your weapons, cut your engines, and prepare to be boarded for inspection." Admiral Korath's reptilian features twisted into what might have been amusement. "You dare issue ultimatums to the Draknari Empire? Your entire system couldn't stop a single one of our destroyers. Stand down immediately or we will take your surrender by force." Reed's expression remained professionally neutral. "Admiral, you seem to be operating under some misconceptions about human defensive capabilities. I strongly recommend you reconsider your position. You have 29 minutes remaining." The transmission ended abruptly from the Draknari side. Reed turned back to his tactical display, where the enemy fleet was beginning to shift into an attack formation. "Sir, enemy vessels are powering up weapon systems," Torres reported. "They appear to be preparing for assault operations." "Defensive platforms?" "All systems green and ready, sir. Enemy vessels are well within engagement range of our primary batteries. Jump inhibitors will be fully charged in 12 minutes. Reed studied the tactical situation. The Draknari fleet was proceeding exactly as human war planners had predicted alien invaders would behave. with overwhelming confidence in their technological superiority and complete disregard for the possibility that humans might have capabilities beyond what they could immediately observe. "Activate electronic warfare protocols," Reed commanded. "Begin targeting their command and communication systems. Let's see how well they coordinate when they can't talk to each other." Throughout the New Geneva system, the Human Defensive Network began its work. What had appeared to be empty space around the Dreknari fleet suddenly filled with jamming signals, sensor ghosts, and communication interference. The aliens would soon discover that entering human space uninvited was a mistake. They would never have the opportunity to repeat. Chaos erupted across the bridge of the Void Render as Admiral Korath watched his carefully planned reconnaissance mission dissolve into a nightmare of confusion and system failures. What should have been a simple demonstration of Dreknari superiority had become a bewildering maze of technical problems that seemed to multiply every few minutes. "Sir, we've lost contact with destroyers Nightfang and Bloodstrike," reported his communications officer, frantically adjusting controls that refused to respond properly. "Their transponder signals are there, but we can't establish voice or data links." Korath gripped the arms of his command chair as another wave of interference washed over his sensor displays. The humans had said something about 30 minutes, and that deadline had passed 20 minutes ago. Since then, his fleet had been steadily losing its ability to function as a coordinated unit. "What's our tactical situation?" he demanded. Commander Voss looked up from the tactical station, his expression grim. "Sir, our sensors are being jammed, spoofed, and overloaded simultaneously. We're getting false readings on everything: enemy positions, friendly locations, even our own system status. Half our targeting computers think we're surrounded by hostile ships, while the other half insist the system is completely empty." The Admiral stared at the main tactical display, which was now showing at least 40 different contacts that appeared and disappeared seemingly at random. Some moved in impossible patterns. Others remained stationary in positions where his scouts had confirmed no objects existed. It was like trying to fight shadows that could reach out and strike back. "How is this possible?" Korath snarled. "These humans are supposed to be primitives. Their technology is centuries behind ours." A new voice cut through the bridge chatter as Lieutenant Drack called out from the weapons control station. "Sir, I'm detecting multiple missile launches, incoming projectiles from everywhere. The computer can't establish a reliable count or trajectory analysis." Korath felt a chill run down his spine. "Activate point defense systems, begin evasive maneuvers." What happened next would haunt the surviving Dreknari for the rest of their lives. The human attack came from directions that shouldn't have been possible, using weapons that their sensors couldn't properly track, coordinated by a command structure that seemed to anticipate their every defensive move. The first wave of human missiles weren't designed to destroy ships. They were designed to disable and confuse. Electronic warfare packages detonated around the Dreknari fleet, creating fields of interference that made their own weapon systems turn against each other. Communications became completely impossible, as every frequency filled with static, false commands and recorded Dreknari voices giving contradictory orders. "Nightfang is firing on Crimson Dawn," someone shouted over the chaos. "They think it's a human vessel. Bloodstrike is requesting immediate assistance, but they're not responding to our signals. Sir, 3 of our frigates just jumped out." A formation. "I think they're trying to retreat, but the jump calculations are all wrong." Admiral Korath watched in growing horror as his disciplined battle group fell apart. Ships that had fought together for years were now scattered across the system, unable to communicate, unsure of which targets were real, and increasingly convinced that they were surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces. The human ships, when they finally revealed themselves, were nothing like what Dreknari intelligence had predicted. They moved in coordinated swarms appearing from behind asteroids and debris fields where no ships should have been able to hide. Their weapons were precise and targeted, striking specific systems rather than trying to destroy entire vessels. "They're taking out our command and control nodes," Voss reported, his voice tight with professional admiration despite their desperate situation. "Every shot is hitting exactly where it will do the most damage to our coordination and communication abilities." The realization hit Korath like a physical blow. The humans weren't trying to win a traditional space battle. They were systematically dismantling his fleet's ability to function as a military unit. Every tactic his ships attempted was countered before it could be fully implemented. Every defensive formation was broken by precisely targeted attacks on key vessels. "This is impossible," he muttered, watching as another Draknari destroyer fell, victim to a coordinated attack by ships that had seemed to appear from nowhere. How do they know our tactical doctrines? How are they predicting our responses? Commander Voss, studying the tactical displays with growing understanding, looked up with the expression of dawning horror. "Sir, I think we've made a terrible mistake. These aren't primitives. Look at their attack patterns. They're fighting like they've been studying us for years. Every counter to our tactics is perfect, like they knew exactly what we would do before we did it." The battle raged for 6 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The human forces fought with a coordination and tactical flexibility that seemed almost supernatural to the Draknari officers. They used electronic warfare, psychological operations, and precise kinetic strikes in a combination that left the alien fleet unable to respond effectively. One by one, Draknari ships fell silent. Some were destroyed outright when their crews continued to resist. Others were disabled and boarded by human marines who moved through the corridors with the same terrifying efficiency their ships had displayed in space combat. As the Void Render shuddered under another precise missile strike, Korath found himself facing a choice he had never imagined having to make. His fleet was broken, his mission was a complete failure, and the humans were offering him a final chance to surrender before they finished destroying his flagship. "Sir," Voss said quietly, "we have to surrender. If we keep fighting, they'll kill everyone." Korath looked around his ruined bridge at the dead and wounded officers who had followed him into this disaster. The tactical displays were dark. Communication systems were offline, and life support was running on emergency power. Through it all, he could hear human voices on the emergency frequencies, speaking in calm, professional tones as they coordinated the final phases of their attack. With shaking hands, Admiral Korath activated the general surrender signal. The humans had demonstrated something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. They weren't the primitives everyone believed them to be. They were something far more dangerous. A species that had learned to fight wars by assuming their enemies would be just as smart, just as ruthless, and just as determined as they were. The silence that followed the surrender was more terrifying than the battle itself. In the space of 6 hours, 12 Draknari warships had been reduced to wreckage and prisoners by a force they had dismissed as insignificant. The humans had sent a message that would echo throughout the galaxy. "Enter, human. Space uninvited and never return." Commander Thek had expected to wake up in a torture chamber, strapped to some horrific alien device designed to extract information through pain and terror. Instead, he found himself lying on a surprisingly comfortable bed in what appeared to be a medical facility. Clean white walls surrounded him, soft lighting provided adequate illumination, and the air smelled of disinfectant rather than fear and death. His scaled skin showed signs of recent medical treatment. The burns from the bridge explosion had been carefully cleaned and bandaged, and someone had set his broken arm with professional skill. A human medic was checking a device attached to his wrist, making notes on a tablet with the casual efficiency of someone performing routine work. "You're awake," the medic observed without looking up. "Good. Dr. Walsh wants to speak with you when you feel ready. There's water on the table beside you, and food will be brought shortly. Do you have any immediate medical concerns?" Thek stared at the human in confusion. In Draknari culture, captured enemies were treated as sources of information to be exploited until they broke or died. The idea of providing medical care and comfortable accommodations was completely foreign to his experience. "Where am I?" he managed to ask, his voice rough from smoke inhalation. "Medical wing of Defense Station Bastion," the medic replied, finally looking up from his tablet. "You've been unconscious for 2 days while we treated your injuries. 37 members of your crew survived the battle and are receiving similar care. 37 survivors out of nearly 400 crew members across the entire battle group. The number hit Thek like a physical blow, reminding him of the devastating efficiency of the human attack. The humans had systematically destroyed 11 ships while capturing one, preserving just enough prisoners to serve their purposes. An hour later, after consuming surprisingly palatable food and drinking clean water, Thek was escorted through corridors that looked more like a university than a military prison. The guards were professional but not threatening, and the other personnel they passed seemed to regard him with curiosity rather than hatred. Dr. Walsh turned out to be a middle-aged human woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to see far more than they revealed. Her office was comfortable and well-appointed, with bookshelves lining the walls and a large window showing the stars outside the station. "Please, sit down," Dr. Walsh said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I'm Dr. Walsh, xenopsychologist and cultural analysis specialist. I'd like to ask you some questions about Draknari society and military organization." Thek settled into the chair, trying to assess the situation. This didn't match any interrogation protocol he had been trained to resist. There were no restraints, no threats, no indication that violence would follow if he refused to cooperate. "I am Commander Thek of the Draknari Imperial Fleet," he said formally. "According to the laws of war, I am required only to provide my name, rank, and service number." Dr. Walsh smiled gently. "Commander, I think there may be some misunderstandings here. First, there was no declared war between our peoples before your fleet entered our space. What occurred was closer to what we might call armed trespass with hostile intent. Second, I'm not interrogating you for military intelligence. I'm a scientist studying interspecies relations and cultural differences." She opened a file on her desk and consulted some notes. "For example, I'm curious about the decision-making process that led to your fleet entering human space without any attempt at communication or negotiation. In human culture, such an action would be considered extremely provocative, if not an outright act of war." Despite himself, Thek found himself responding to her reasonable tone and apparent academic interest. "The Draknari Empire has expanded across this sector for over 3 centuries. When we encounter primitive species, we assess their capabilities and determine whether integration into the empire would be beneficial." "Integration," Dr. Walsh repeated, making a note. "That's an interesting term. Could you describe what integration typically involves for the species being integrated?" Over the following hours, Thek found himself providing detailed answers to questions he had never considered particularly sensitive. Dr. Walsh's approach was so different from what he expected that he began to think of their conversation as an academic discussion rather than an interrogation. The human woman seemed genuinely interested in understanding Draknari culture, their expansion methods, and their military organization. She asked thoughtful questions about their technology, their political structure, and their relationships with other alien species they had encountered. It wasn't until much later that Thek realized how much information he had provided. Dr. Walsh had somehow led him through a comprehensive discussion of Draknari military capabilities, strategic thinking, and expansion plans without ever making it feel like an interrogation. "One thing puzzles me, Commander," Dr. Walsh said during their third session. "Your intelligence reports described humans as primitive and technologically inferior. Yet your own observations during the battle must have contradicted those assessments. How do you explain that discrepancy?" Thek considered the question carefully. The memory of the battle was still painful, but he found himself analyzing it with professional interest rather than the shame he had initially felt. "Your tactics were unlike anything in our experience," he admitted. "Draknari military doctrine is based on technological superiority and overwhelming force. We've never encountered a species that could coordinate so effectively or anticipate our responses so precisely." Dr. Walsh nodded thoughtfully. "Human military thinking developed differently. We spent thousands of years fighting wars against opponents who were exactly as intelligent as we were, using similar technology and resources. Our tactical doctrines assume the enemy will be clever, adaptable, and determined. When we encounter species who rely primarily on technological advantages, our approaches tend to be very effective." The revelation was disturbing to Thek. Though Draknari had built their empire by conquering species who were less technologically advanced, less militarily organized, or simply unprepared for the kind of warfare the Empire practiced. Humans had developed their military capabilities by fighting opponents who matched them in every category, except experience and preparation. "There's something else I should mention," Dr. Walsh said, opening another file. "The data we collected during the battle has been extremely valuable. We now have detailed information about Draknari shield frequencies, weapon signatures, sensor capabilities, and tactical patterns. This information has already been distributed to every human military command in our territory." Thek felt his blood run cold. "You mean, if the Draknari Empire ever sends another fleet into human space, our defensive forces will be ready for them. We'll know exactly how to counter your technology and tactics before the battle even begins. In effect, your reconnaissance mission has given us a complete intelligence profile of your military capabilities." The full scope of the disaster began to dawn on Thek. Not only had Admiral Korath's battle group been destroyed, but their sacrifice had provided the humans with the information they needed to defend against any future Draknari attacks. The mission that was supposed to demonstrate Draknari superiority had instead given their potential enemies every advantage. Dr. Walsh closed the file and looked at him with what might have been sympathy. "Commander, I think it's important for you to understand something. This incident could have been avoided entirely if your people had simply made contact before entering our space. Humans are generally peaceful and prefer diplomatic solutions to most problems, but we take uninvited armed intrusions very seriously." As Thek was escorted back to his quarters, he found himself facing a reality that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The humans weren't primitive or technologically inferior. They were something far more dangerous. They were a species that had learned to fight wars by assuming their enemies would be as smart and ruthless as they were themselves. The small transport vessel that delivered Commander Thek and his surviving crew members to the edge of Draknari space looked nothing like the proud warships they had once commanded. It was a basic civilian craft, unarmed and unarmored, with barely enough range to reach the nearest Draknari outpost. Every few hours, a small device implanted behind Thek's ear would emit a barely audible pulse, reminding him that the humans would be tracking his location for the rest of his life. Admiral Korath was waiting for them at Outpost Zeta 7, his flagship surrounded by a full battle fleet of 40 vessels. The Admiral's expression was grim as he reviewed the preliminary reports from the survivors. In the 2 weeks since losing contact with Battle Group 7, Korath had assembled the largest military force the Draknari had deployed in over a century. "Tell me everything," Korath commanded as Thek stood at attention in the Admiral's ready room. "Leave out nothing." For the next several hours, Thek provided a detailed account of the disaster at New Geneva. He described the systematic destruction of the Draknari fleet, the terrifying coordination of the human forces, and the clinical efficiency with which they had dismantled what should have been an overwhelming military advantage. Admiral Korath listened with growing disbelief and mounting rage. The idea that 12 Draknari warships could be defeated by primitive humans was almost impossible to accept. Yet the evidence was undeniable: 11 ships destroyed, hundreds of crew members dead, and the survivors carrying a message that challenged everything the Empire believed about its own superiority. "You mentioned a message," Korath said when Thek finished his report. "Deliver it exactly as it was given to you." Thek straightened his shoulders and recited the words that had been burned into his memory. "Captain Reed of Human Defense Command instructed me to deliver this message. Human space is not to be entered without invitation. This is not a threat. It is a statement of natural law, like gravity or thermodynamics. Test it again, and the response will be proportional to the intrusion." The Admiral's scaled features twisted with fury. "And you accepted this humiliation? You allowed primitives to dictate terms to the Draknari Empire?" "Sir, with respect, they are not primitives," Thek replied carefully. "Their technology may appear less advanced in some areas, but their tactical capabilities are beyond anything in our experience. They fight like they've been preparing for war against opponents exactly like us." Korath stood and activated the holographic display that dominated one wall of the ready room, The tactical projection showed the positions of both fleets, his 40 ships arrayed in battle formation, and the vast empty space where human territory began just a few light years away. 40 ships, Commander. 40 of our most advanced vessels, with veteran crews and proven weapons. Surely even these humans cannot stand against such force. Thek felt the implant behind his ear pulse again, a constant reminder that the humans were listening to every word of this conversation. The thought chilled him more than Admiral Korath's anger. Sir, there's something else Captain Reed wanted me to tell you, if you expressed intention to attack again. Thek's voice was steady despite the fear growing in his chest. He said the humans are not primitives. They are the species that spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other, and they got very good at it. The only reason the Draknari Empire exists is because they hadn't noticed us yet. The ready room fell silent except for the hum of the ship's life support systems. Admiral Korath stared at the tactical display, his hands clenched behind his back. The implications of Thek's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Captain Reed also mentioned, Thek continued, that if you brought a larger fleet to test their defenses, the response would be proportional. When I asked what that meant, he said humans had never lost a war they decided to fight seriously. Admiral Korath turned from the display, his expression unreadable. You believe this human was telling the truth? Sir, I watched them destroy 11 ships without losing a single vessel of their own. They fought with coordination that seemed impossible, using tactics we couldn't counter. Everything they told me during my detention proved to be accurate. Thek paused, then added quietly, I believe Captain Reed was being generous in calling their previous response proportional. Over the following days, more intelligence reached the Draknari fleet. Long-range sensors detected increased activity throughout human space. Ships were moving, defensive installations were being reinforced, and new energy signatures were appearing on the borders of human territory. The humans were clearly preparing for the possibility of a larger conflict. What troubled Admiral Korath most was the apparent ease with which the humans had adapted to the threat. Their response was swift, coordinated, and comprehensive. Every human system showed signs of defensive preparations, as if the entire species had switched from peaceful expansion to war readiness overnight. The final factor in Korath's decision came from an unexpected source. Intelligence reports from other sectors began reaching the fleet, describing encounters between various alien species and human vessels. The pattern was consistent. Humans who had been polite and cooperative in diplomatic situations became implacably hostile when threatened. A trade delegation from the Vaxian Consortium reported that human merchants who had been friendly and accommodating became coldly professional the moment weapons were displayed. A pirate fleet that had attempted to raid human shipping lanes had simply vanished, leaving behind only debris and automated distress beacons warning others to avoid human space. Most disturbing of all was a report from the Hegemony Council, the loose alliance of species that governed much of the galactic core. Their intelligence services had been quietly observing human expansion for decades, and their assessment was sobering. Humans, they concluded, were not a typical spacefaring species. They were survivors of a world that had produced predators, capable of conquering an entire planet through intelligence, cooperation, and relentless adaptation. Admiral Korath spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing the accumulated evidence. Every piece of intelligence pointed to the same conclusion. Humans were not the primitive species they appeared to be. They were something far more dangerous, a species that had evolved in an environment where only the most successful killers survived to reproduce. On the 4th morning, Korath made a decision that would define the rest of his career. He activated the fleet-wide communication system and addressed his 40-ship commanders directly. All vessels, this is Admiral Korath. After careful analysis of the intelligence gathered from our reconnaissance mission, I have concluded that an attack on human space would not serve the interests of the Draknari Empire. Effective immediately, all human territory is designated as a no-entry zone for Imperial forces. The silence that followed his announcement was broken only by requests for clarification from confused commanders. The idea of the mighty Draknari Empire backing down from a confrontation was almost inconceivable. Sir, came the voice of Captain Doss from the heavy cruiser Empire's Fist. "Are you ordering a retreat from primitives?" Korath's response was measured and final. "Captain, I am ordering a strategic withdrawal from a species that just demonstrated the ability to destroy a Draknari battle group without suffering casualties. There is no shame in recognizing a superior opponent." The fleet began its withdrawal that same day, but not before Admiral Korath sent an encrypted message to Imperial Command on the homeworld. His report was comprehensive, detailing every aspect of the failed reconnaissance mission and providing his professional assessment of human military capabilities. The response from Imperial Command came 2 weeks later. Admiral Korath was relieved of his position and recalled to the homeworld for a formal inquiry. However, his replacement, Admiral Vex, arrived with sealed orders that validated Korath's decision. Human space was officially designated as off-limits to Imperial expansion efforts. Word of the Draknari retreat spread quickly through the networks of communication that connected the various alien species. The story grew with each telling, but the core message remained consistent. The humans had faced down the Draknari Empire and won without firing more shots than necessary. Commander Thek, now permanently stationed at a remote outpost on the edge of Draknari space, found himself frequently consulted by intelligence officers and strategic planners. His first-hand experience with human military capabilities made him a valuable resource for understanding this new galactic power. During one such briefing, a young intelligence officer asked the question that had been troubling military analysts throughout the sector. "Commander, in your professional opinion, what would happen if the humans decided to expand beyond their current territory?" Thek considered the question carefully, feeling the familiar pulse from the tracking device that reminded him of his permanent connection to human monitoring systems. He thought about the clinical efficiency with which they had dismantled his fleet, the systematic way they had gathered intelligence from their prisoners, and the calm professionalism with which they had delivered their warning. "Lieutenant," he said finally, "I believe the humans are currently expanding exactly as fast as they want to. Their slow, methodical colonization isn't a sign of weakness or limited capability. It's the measured advance of a species that never leaves anything to chance." The young officer made notes on his tablet. "And if someone tried to stop their expansion?" Thek was quiet for a long moment, remembering Captain Reed's words about humans being a species that had never lost a war they decided to fight seriously. "Then that someone would discover what happens when you threaten something the humans have decided to protect," he said. "And based on what I witnessed at New Geneva, I don't think anyone in the galaxy is prepared for that kind of conflict." As the years passed, human space continued its steady expansion, one carefully planned colony at a time. The difference now was that no one tried to interfere. The lesson of New Geneva had spread throughout the galaxy: enter human space uninvited, and never return. The humans themselves seemed unaware of their growing reputation. They continued their peaceful trade relationships, their diplomatic missions, and their scientific exchanges with the same friendly professionalism they had always shown. But every species in the sector now understood that this peaceful exterior concealed something much more dangerous. Commander Thek spent his remaining years writing reports and briefings about human military capabilities, trying to help his people understand the new reality of galactic politics. His final report, filed shortly before his death from old age, contained a single recommendation that became official Draknari policy. "The humans are not our enemies, but they could become our destroyers if we mistake their restraint for weakness. We should be grateful that they seem to prefer peace to conquest, because the alternative would end civilizations." The tracking device that had monitored Thek's location for 27 years stopped transmitting the day he died. Somewhere, in human space, a computer noted the cessation of the signal and marked another entry in the files that tracked the consequences of entering human territory uninvited. The message had been delivered, received, and understood throughout the galaxy. Human space remained inviolate, not because of walls or weapons, but because every species had learned the same fundamental truth. Some boundaries exist not to keep others out, but to keep something far more dangerous from coming after you.